Aloha, and thank you for all being here to commemorate the Queen's Death Day. She's been a very strong figure in my life and a strong motivation for the work that I do on justice. So I put together a little something that I'm going to kind of read and talk about at the same time. In 1895, an abortive attempt by the Hawaiian royalists to restore Queen Lili'u to power resulted in the Queen's arrest. She was forced to sign a document of abdication that relinquished all her future claims to the throne. Following this, she endured a humiliating public trial before a military tribunal in her former throne room. Convicted of having knowledge of a royalist plot, Lili'u was fined $5,000 and sentenced to 5 years in prison at hard labor. The sentence was commuted to imprisonment in an upstairs bedroom of Iolani Palace. During her imprisonment, the Queen was denied any visitors other than one lady-in-waiting. She began each day with her daily devotions, followed by reading, quilting, crochet work, or music composition. After her release from Iolani Palace, the Queen remained under house arrest for 5 months at her private home, Washington Place. For another 8 months, she was forbidden to leave Oahu before all restrictions were lifted. Today, the occupying force of Hawaii has changed very little. The United States has continued its legacy of imperialism, occupying other nations in the name of democracy with little regard for the cultures and needs of the citizens of those nations. A new report released by OHA in September entitled "The Disparate Treatment of Native Hawaiians in the Criminal Justice System" sadly shows the legacy of the occupiers remains in force today. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. A radical approach to the U.S. criminal justice system means we must go to the root of the problem, not reform, not better beds in better prisons. We're not called only to trim the leaves and prune the branches, but to rip up this unjust system by its roots." The truth of Dr. King's statement is validated as one reviews Hawaii's incarcerated population, where the Department of Public Safety statistics reveal that 40% of the incarcerated are of Native Hawaiian ancestry, even though Native Hawaiians comprise only 24% of the population. In actuality, the percentage of Hawaiians in prison is way higher, closer to 60 to 70%. Of those people, 84% of the women and 63% of the men are in for nonviolent crimes, mostly related to drugs. According to the 2004 Hawaii State Treatment Assessment Needs Program, Native Hawaiians do not use drugs at widely dissimilar rates to other groups. So despite the fact that drug use is pretty even across our socioeconomic spectrum, and Native Hawaiians are no more likely than any other group to commit crimes, they are significantly overrepresented in our system. Why? This isn't a question just for Native Hawaiians. It's a question that should trouble all of Hawaii because it points to injustice in our justice system. And if we really believe that justice is blind, then this must be absolutely intolerable. We must rip up this unjust system by its roots. And despite Native Hawaiians being 24% of the population, 41% of those serving their sentences abroad in dungeons owned by Corrections Corporation of America, 41% of those shipped abroad are Native Hawaiian. Why? Currently, Corrections Corporation of America has been granted the power to go through the Department of Public Safety files and choose who they're going to take. And it's been said that they choose Native Hawaiians because they're docile. So they choose to incarcerate Native Hawaiians thousands of miles from their ancestral lands to the Sonoran excuse me, desert of Eloy, Arizona. The research backs up our assertion that family visits are crucial. They're a great strategy that we should be adopting to reduce recidivism and help families. Instead, we're shipping people thousands of miles from their ancestral lands, from their ohana, which makes visitation virtually impossible. But it does make recidivism very possible. Sending our people thousands of miles from home with no exit strategy for 15 years is a glaring mistake, and we are paying dearly for it today. We have ripped apart the social fabric of Hawaii by tearing apart families, increasing the likelihood that even more Native Hawaiian keiki will end up incarcerated themselves. The data show kids that have parents incarcerated are 6 to 7 times more likely to end up incarcerated themselves. We need to rip up this unjust system by its roots. We know that the majority of incarcerated individuals are nonviolent and are convicted for drugs or drug-related crimes. So the first thing we have to acknowledge is that drug abuse is a public health problem, not a criminal justice problem. According to the 2004 Hawaii State Needs Assessment, Native Hawaiians comprise the largest portion of individuals admitted to prison for drug offenses. Again, we know that drug use is even across the socioeconomic spectrum. Why then are Native Hawaiians the ones who end up incarcerated, and for longer terms than any other group? Research from the Washington Institute of Public Policy shows that for every dollar we spend on community in the treatment in the community, we save $18. We know this, and yet we continue to use incarceration, the most expensive sanction, to address this public health problem. Why? We need to rip up this unjust system by its roots. Almost half of the women and 1/4 of the men in custody are community custody, the least restrictive level of custody of incarceration. The department's own definition says they should be in the community with little to no supervision. So why aren't they? Why are so many community custody individuals in Arizona? We need to rip up this unjust system by its roots. So one of the real questions that emerges from this report is, why is one population targeted? Why are Native Hawaiians disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system? If Native Hawaiians comprise 24% of the population, and the data show that they are no more likely to commit crimes than any other group, why is at least 40% of our incarcerated population Native Hawaiian? Something is wrong. This report is another look and highlights the need for deeper analysis, more research, more concern, more voices shouting out for justice. We need to rip up this unjust system by its roots. This report is a call to action for all of us to speak out for this injustice. We must make sure that it's addressed. Raise your voice. Honor the Queen. Shout out for justice now. Mahalo.